Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Dzienis with Coldwell Banker here in Northern New Jersey. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. And today what I want to talk about is transparency in real estate transactions. Actually, let's be honest, lack of transparency in real estate transactions. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I've had some interesting situations recently with some clients of mine where if we knew information up front, we probably wouldn't have wasted our time trying to submit an offer, getting our offer accepted, and going through whatever the process was to move forward on that transaction for that house. And it really just got me thinking about, gosh, if there was more information, if there was some transparency around, let's say, the condition of the house or terms of what the seller was looking for, it really could have made things a lot easier. Maybe we wouldn't have even put an offer in on the house to begin with. So that's what this video is all about today, is transparency and having information so that you as a buyer can make an informed decision, but also as a seller to put information out there so that you can get that keen buyer who says, you know something, I feel pretty comfortable that I definitely want to move forward with submitting an offer and moving forward in this transaction if their offer is accepted. So today I'm identifying 3 specific time wasters that, as a seller, something to think about, and as a buyer to work with your agent on that really can kind of help you make that informed decision. All right, so let's just get right into it. So I've been in real estate for 6 years now, I guess it's been, and it's interesting. When you first get into it, you think, real estate is so easy. It's gonna be so simple to get this transaction to go through. I tell my buyers and I tell my sellers all the time, do not get excited until, if you're a buyer, that key is in your hand. If you're a seller, make sure that money gets in your account, right? That the closing has been confirmed, it's done, and the money shows up in your account. Because honestly, anything can happen in any real estate transaction. From the very start all the way to the end, doesn't mean it's gonna close. So the first tip I wanna focus on is a seller's disclosure. And if you're not familiar with what a seller's disclosure is, it's basically a document that discloses information about the house that you might be looking to purchase. And what it's meant to do is give any information to a potential buyer about, let's say, renovations or updates, if there's any issues with the house, like if there was a roof leak and there was a repair, if there was a cesspool, or maybe, for instance, there's an easement on the property. The seller's disclosure is meant to just give as much information as possible or as little information as possible to the general public to say, here is the condition of my house as a seller. So in fact, I talk a little bit more about seller's disclosures and why they're important. Actually, you could check that out in that video up here, which I think I'm putting up there. When I work with a seller, I always recommend doing a seller's disclosure because the more information you can put out there, the better it might be for your potential buyers and just to kind of give you a smoother transaction overall. The buyer knows potentially what to expect as they go through inspections and they're going through the final stages of purchasing the house. Now here in New Jersey, it's not required to do a seller's disclosure. Some sellers don't do them. So if we flip it now and I work with a buyer, and let's say I'm working with a buyer, what I always do is I will provide, if there is a seller's disclosure, I look in the listing because they get attached to the listing, and then I will send it to my buyer and I'll review it with them if there's anything that stands out. But here's why it's important to have a seller's disclosure. Having information is valuable to both sides because then the buyer can make an informed decision whether they want to move forward or not, or can ask some questions if there was a repair that was done, for instance. Sometimes it's a red flag. Why is the seller not giving insights or information? Could be perceived that way. So if you're a seller, I recommend please do a seller's disclosure. It's not required, but the more information you can provide, the better. And if you're a buyer and you're working with your agent, talk to your agent. See if there is actually a seller's disclosure attached to the listing. It's only gonna help you kind of make that informed decision. All right, tip number 2 for both buyers and sellers is being transparent with flood information. Here it is, January 2024, Happy New Year. And in the past couple weeks here in Northern New Jersey, there has been some major rainfall that actually caused some flooding in the Little Falls area of New Jersey. The Pascack River is going higher and higher, and it's causing a lot of flood issues in that section of New Jersey. So flooding is definitely becoming more and more prevalent. And in fact, here in New Jersey, they've just passed some new laws to really have more transparency around if a property is in a flood zone or not. I've got some great information about flood stuff. Here's another video for you. In fact, when I bought my house, I was not in a flood zone, and then within 5 years, FEMA changed their zones and I wound up being in a flood zone. So tip number 2 is, if you're a seller, make sure that there is transparency around whether your property is in a flood zone. If your property actually flooded, for instance, that will show up through title searches. What I've noticed here in New Jersey, for instance, each multiple listing service is a little bit different with how stuff is displayed. So the primary MLS that I use here in Bergen County is New Jersey MLS. In there, an agent can designate very easily if something's in a flood zone or not. In some of the other MLSs, it's not as apparent, but it is your obligation as an agent as well as a seller to disclose as much as possible if you are in a flood zone or not. And the new law that I talk about in that video, for instance, it's going to make it more important that you disclose that information. So if you're a seller, be transparent with flood information, because a buyer might decide, you know something, I don't think I want my house to be in a flood zone, so I'm gonna pass. Now, if you're a buyer, ask your agent, is this house in a flood zone? They'll look in the MLS to see if there's any information there. And if not, I always recommend going to FEMA.org, FEMA.org. That allows you to look up a specific address, doesn't matter the address itself, put it in, and you'll be able to see the type of flood zone you might be in. And here's another thing I recommend to buyers. Even if you're very, very close to a flood zone, you might not need it. But in my experience and what happened to me was our flood zones changed. When I first bought my house, I was not in a flood zone. FEMA changed their maps. I wound up being in a flood zone. I needed flood insurance, and a year later, I had 1.5 feet of water in my basement. If something is very close to a flood zone and you don't need it right away, doesn't mean you're not gonna need it eventually. So just keep that in mind as well. Where is the house placed on the FEMA map in conjunction to where the zone actually is? All right, the final tip I wanna talk about today in regards to transparency and maybe lack of transparency is the as-is designation in a listing. I see it a lot in listings where a seller might say in the listing, this is an as-is sale, or maybe certain parts of the house are as-is. Like you might see it a lot with chimneys or a basement area or something, but chimneys, fireplaces, like that kind of stuff. If the whole house is not as-is, there might be pieces or parts of the house. Basically what that is telling me as an agent is telling you as a buyer, if the seller is saying as-is, they're not gonna negotiate necessarily on any of those items. So if it's the whole house, good luck trying to get some kind of negotiation or asking for any inspection items. Probably not gonna happen. So if it's only certain items like the garage or the fireplace, then those are things that you won't potentially ask for in inspection items if you actually get to that point. Doesn't mean you can't ask for inspection items or credits or repairs on other parts of the house, but these are deemed as is. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I had a recent situation with one of my clients actually, and we were haggling trying to get a house, and they had a really, really good offer. It must have been 3 to 5 days or so of just price, condition, price, whatever the situation was. The agent was traveling, so there was a communication lag there as well. But not once, nowhere in the listing did it say that this was going to be an as-is sale. So we're working hard, we're negotiating back and forth. We actually get to a price where there's agreement from the seller, and then the listing agent says to me, well, your offer is going to get signed as long as you agree that this sale is as is. So we just spent 5 days haggling back and forth, and then just to discover that your deal's gonna get accepted if you accept this as is contingency. Now, if we knew that up front and it was listed in the actual listing itself, probably would have saved us 5 days of a waste of time, and we probably wouldn't have even gone to go look at that house. You know, this client actually would like some leverage potentially if there are any credit issues or let's say inspection items that might require a credit or a repair, and there's nothing wrong with wanting that. But it would have been nice to have known that up front versus 5 days of haggling and then, oh, by the way, you're gonna get it, but you have to agree to this term. Not cool, waste of time, really annoying. So when it comes to the as-is designation, when I'm working with a seller, I wanna make sure that that is apparent in a listing itself. So I make sure that the language is in there, especially with the advertising remarks, as well as for any remarks that only an agent can see. It's basically telling the general public, okay, I'm not really willing to negotiate on anything. You can ask, but doesn't mean I'm gonna say yes to it. So it's basically a flag to a buyer to say, before you do this, probably not gonna be a lot of wiggle room for negotiation. And then to flip that, if you're a buyer and you see that as-is designation, it's a flag to you to say, are you willing to kind of move forward because you love the house so much? You might not be able to ask for things. Actually, you know what? You can ask for things, but what if the seller says no? and then what will you do at that stage? Because you're gonna put some money up front for an inspection and time and all of that kind of stuff, and if you get to that point and you ask and they say no, well, you kind of knew it going into the process that it was an as-is sale. But the whole point of all of this is if the designation was there, if we knew it up front, we probably wouldn't have moved forward with all the haggling and everything else that we were doing trying to get this deal secure so that we could move forward. So it's just kind of a time suck and a time waste, and if we knew it up front, would have made our lives just a little bit easier. All right, so there you go. 3 time wasters, time sucks that really can happen in any real estate transaction. The more information you have as a buyer, the more information you provide as a seller, it could potentially just make for a much smoother transaction. You get buyers who are more keen to either want to work under the conditions that you're displaying as a seller. And it helps a buyer weigh the risks. Are they willing to kind of move forward or not based on information that they've gathered through this whole process? Because honestly, you could spend countless days and hours going through this process just to discover, oh, by the way, your deal will get accepted if you now accept this as-is designation. Yeah, that one kind of hurt. So let me ask you guys, what kind of time wasters, time sucks have you experienced in real estate itself? Whether you're a buyer or a seller, put them down in the comments. Let's talk about it a little bit. These are 3 that are common with me that I've experienced over the years, and a couple of these more recently, like I said, with this one buyer in particular. You know, just to be on that emotional roller coaster of we have it, do we not have it, do we want to go through this, do we not want to go through this? Like, it's a lot of questions. And it can be pretty emotional, but having information really can kind of help the process along for both sides to hopefully just make the transaction smoother, because at the end of the day, as a seller, you want to sell. As a buyer, you want to buy. So use these 3 tips, whether you're a seller or whether you're a buyer, just to make it smoother and make the deal close. So I want to thank you guys for watching. Again, I am Bob Dzienis with Coldwell Banker here in Northern New Jersey. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can always reach out to me. Here's my information below. I service all over Northern New Jersey. Happy to answer any specific questions that you have. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next video.